I've kept the chaos of my days as a combat medic locked away in the dark corners of my neural implants for years. Therapy, with its relentless code and unyielding algorithms, finally cracked me open, forcing long-suppressed memories to surge forward like an unstoppable stream of corrupted data. So now, as these fragmented recollections resurface, I'm transcribing them into my hollow journal, gaps and all. If anyone cares to read them on the interlink, maybe I'll share more. In the Neo-Afghan outposts, the Corps were there to pacify tensions among the local synth clans, less plasma rifle fire, more neon handshakes, and VR smiles. Shame nobody told the locals. One thing we did manage to cobble together for the community was a 4-room school. A tiny note of hope amidst the war-torn landscape, made of retrofitted nano brick and biowood. It wasn't much, but it was something. That day, I was embedded with Bravo Platoon, wandering the dusty, beige-gray labyrinth of this sprawling village. Our command leader, Captain Jared Monroe, was deep in negotiations with the local elders, a tense exchange of cryptocoins for temporary truces. The surrounding structures, their dull stone facades marred by old plasma burns, painted the scene in desolation. "How'd it go?" asked a soldier. Let's call him Ryan, when Captain Monroe finally emerged from the meeting, his haptic gloves dusty and his face lined with concern. "Not good," the captain replied, his voice a distorted mix of static over the comms. "They don't want us here." Mostly just glared at us and muttered stuff. "I've got a bad feeling about this." Those words hung in the heavy, arid air, casting a fluorescent pall over the squad. Experience had taught us one thing. Bad feelings weren't just feelings, they were premonitions. We made our way to the makeshift learning hub, a school, if you could even call it that. For neon-lined rooms, pieced together with plascrete panels and old-world biowood. It had seen some use since it was patched together, but today it was silent. No swarms of kids zipping through the corridors. No hollow teachers projecting outdated lessons on scratched-up plascreens. Just stillness. I leaned against one of the pulsating violet walls, my augmented sensors idling as I took a gulp from my hydrocell flask. "It's too damn hot," I muttered, my voice distorted slightly through my respirator's filter. Next to me, Specialist Tyler grinned under his chromatic visor. "Astra, you always say that. We're in the desert. It's gonna be hot." I rolled my eyes, hidden behind my adaptive shades. "Yeah, but heat back in the new Louisiana sectors hits different. More like walking through soup." He shook his head, laughing. "You're wild, document. A little sun isn't gonna melt your circuits." The lieutenant, Emily Tanner, strolled up as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the schoolyard's debris. "How much longer are we sticking around?" someone asked. We all silently begged for a dismissal. "No luck. Not today." One of the elders, Tanner, began, her voice crackling over our comms, says the school's been a staging point for rebel attacks and sabotage drones. Even when kids are in class. Can you believe that? Of course we could. Easily. "So, what's the play?" another soldier, Callum, asked. Tanner's tone hardened. "Command wants us to dig in. Overnight watch. We leave at dawn. If anything moves that looks unfriendly, we start with warnings. If they keep coming, well, you know the drill. Second squad links up with us in the morning. Until then, stay sharp." The groans were immediate. None of us had prepped for a prolonged stay. A couple of synth rations, energy packs, and ammo weren't exactly luxurious provisions. Still, we felt the unease settling and something in the air buzzed wrong. The kind of wrong you don't shake. Inside the school, we surveyed the setup. It wasn't much, 2 rooms on either side of a central corridor. 1 entrance, 1 exit. Brutally simple. Brutally dangerous. As we cleared the space, I tossed my pack onto a corner slab of reinforced flooring. This would be our barracks for the night, a cold, featureless cell bathed in dull green light leaking from cracked hollow panels. By the time the sun disappeared, the rotation for watch began. I drifted over to one of the few windows where Sergeant Jamie was stationed with 2 others, their neon-trimmed rifles glowing faintly. "Anything worth noting?" I asked, attempting to distract my racing mind. ADHD might have been a pain in normal life, but here it was a survival mechanism. Jamie gestured toward the far end of the street. See that guy? Passed us 5 times already. Always talking on his wrist comm. He's scouting us, Astra. That my last energy core, he's feeding intel to someone nasty. You think we're gonna see action tonight? I tried to sound casual, but Jamie caught the flicker of tension in my voice. His jaw clenched, and in the low light, I caught the gleam of his augmented eye implant. Go tell Tanner. We're about to get lit up tonight. Mark my words. I gave him a nod and a quick slap on the shoulder. When it starts, I'm right there with you, brother. Damn it, was all Tanner said when I relayed Jamie's warning. The squad snapped into motion, taking positions. 2 rooms on either side of the hall, with me hanging back in the middle. I always mapped everyone's location in my mind. Saving lives meant cutting seconds, and seconds meant survival. I called it the Astra algorithm. Take a break, Astra, Jamie grunted, still perched by the window. But I couldn't. I'd already checked my medpack 3 times, ensuring every stim stick, biogel injector, and nano bandage was perfectly prepped. Instead, I roamed the halls, cracking jokes to lift the mood. You're insane, Astra, chuckled Callum after one of my offhand remarks. I smirked. You love it. And honestly, in those moments, I did too. It felt like, for a fleeting second, I belonged. But just as the laughter peaked, the reality sank in. Tonight was going to be long. The quiet shattered in the dead of night with the sharp staccato of gunfire. Pop, pop, pop. My neural interface flagged it instantly, pinging alerts in my HUD. They're testing us, muttered Jamie, ducking behind the dim glow of a tactical shield. Pop, pop. Sparks flew as bullets ricocheted off reinforced plascrete walls. Anyone got visuals? Anything? Sergeant Callum's voice roared over the chaos. Silence. Nobody could confirm a thing, but the tension was so thick it felt like it had its own gravity. Then came the call. Contact, shouted someone from room 3 on the right side of the corridor. It was go time. The room burst alive with plasma bolts and kinetic rounds. I sprinted to check on the squad. Good. I yelled, my voice barely cutting through the cacophony. A quick thumbs up from Tyler, and I was out again. My comms buzzed with Tanner's distorted orders. Contact front, contact left. Light M up. It didn't matter where we looked. Fire seemed to erupt from all sides. Casings clinked as they hit the floor, mixing with the electric hum of energy packs being swapped out mid-firefight. My night vision optics reduced the world to a tight greenish glow, and tracer rounds cut through the haze like laser beams, darting towards unseen enemies. Fear was always there, creeping into my thoughts like a rogue program, but I pushed it back. These weren't just soldiers, they were my people. My mission wasn't survival, it was to get them home. All of them. Medic. The word hit me like a neural spike, flooding my head with adrenaline. I darted into the second room. A rifleman clutched his shoulder, his voice trembling with panic. You're fine, stop yelling, I said sharply as I scanned him with my med scan. The wound wasn't critical, just a graze. You'll live, I reassured him, patching it up with a synth band. Now go, I ordered, pushing him back into the fight. Another call. Medic. This time it was Tanner, shouting from room 1. I sprinted through the corridor just as my motion tracker flagged incoming movement. The enemy darted low, barely a blur in the shadows, before hurling something through the shattered window. My HUD screamed, "Grenade incoming." Time slowed. I felt a hard tackle from behind, Jamie, throwing me to the ground. The grenade clinked against the floor, its dull glow threatening to turn the room into shrapnel hell. Another soldier booted it into a corner where it exploded harmlessly against the stacked desks. The blast ripped through the air, deafening and disorienting. Smoke filled my vision, and static buzzed in my ears. Medic! Medic! The shout dragged me back to focus. I stumbled forward, nearly tripping over someone. The machine gunner, Logan, was down, clutching his leg. Shrapnel had torn through his thigh, blood pooling on the cracked floor. "Hold still," I muttered, my hands working with precision as my med-drone deployed additional light. Logan grimaced in pain, his augmented fingers twitching as he gripped his weapon. "Can you fire?" I asked, tightening the last wrap around his leg. His face twisted with agony, but he nodded. Grabbing his autocannon, he rose on shaky legs, the massive gun spitting vengeance through the smoke. Whatever pain he felt, he poured it into every shot. Tanner yanked me back into the corridor, her visor cracked, a smear of blood across her cheek. "Stay here, Vane. You're no good to us if you're down." I wanted to argue, but she was right. If I went down, so did any hope of keeping these people alive. "How many?" I shouted at Callum, who was reloading by the window. "Feels like the whole goddamn city," he spat, his cheek bleeding from a graze. "Hold still," I ordered, slapping a quick seal bandage onto the wound. He grunted and returned fire without a word. The next explosion was close. A rocket tore through one window, zipped through the corridor, and blasted out the far side. My HUD tracked its smoky tail as the room rocked under the shockwave. The enemy might have been relentless, but accuracy clearly wasn't their strong suit. "Thanks for missing," I muttered under my breath, already bracing for whatever hell came next. "Medic." The shout cut through the chaos, and I bolted into room 2, my HUD sweeping for vitals. Nothing. No injuries. Wrong call. Damn it, I cursed under my breath before another scream dragged me forward. "Doc. Over here." I skidded into room 4, dropping to my knees beside the injured private first class. His voice was trembling, his words running over themselves like a corrupted audio file. I'm gonna die," he kept repeating, his cyber-enhanced limbs shaking from the shock. "Shut up and let me work," I snapped, my hands already activating the med drones hovering in my pack. The PFC had taken a slug to the collarbone bad, but not fatal. In the dim room, I couldn't work fast enough. "I need light. Somebody now." I screamed, barely hiding my panic. Arizona responded, shining his wrist lamp onto the wound. "I don't want to die, Astra," the PFC whimpered, his southern twang cracking as his neural nodes overloaded with pain signals. "You're fine. You're not dying," I replied firmly, my voice the only steady thing in the room. "Hold that fucking light steady." I barked at Arizona. The beam froze in place, unwavering now. Using a microscalpel from my wrist implant, I carefully began extracting the bullet fragment. The private screamed. Yeah, it hurt like hell, but at least he'd live. Finally, I packed the wound with med gel and sealed it with a nano bandage. "All right, you're patched. Get your ass back in the fight," I ordered, tapping his trembling shoulder. "Thanks, Doc," he muttered weakly, cradling his rifle as he staggered to his feet. I shot a glance at Arizona. "Watch him," I said curtly before dashing back out. An hour and a half later, the reinforcements arrived. Their heavy-duty Humvees and a hulking evac mech rolled through, laying down suppressive fire with mounted .50 cal turrets. The enemy positions disintegrated under the relentless assault, the glow of their tracer rounds swallowed by chaos. Second platoon was here. Relief flooded over me as the LT barked quick orders to gather the wounded. I worked with the others, loading the injured into the evac vehicles. The air still crackled with distant firefights, but the tide had turned. "Doc, you're going with them," LT Tanner said, her tone resolute. "No way," I argued, slinging my rifle back over my shoulder. "If my squad's here, I'm staying." She grabbed my vest and shoved me toward the transport with surprising force. "Get on the damn transport, document. They need you back at base." Anger flared in my chest, but the look in her eyes softened me. "Listen, Astra. It's over. We'll be right behind you. Just go." I sighed heavily, cursing under my breath as I climbed into the evac vehicle. Inside, the wounded PFC from earlier sat slumped next to me. His head lolled against my shoulder as exhaustion overtook him. "Thought I was done for, Doc," He murmured weakly. You're not dead. But I think your time in the trenches might be, I said, leaning my head back against the vibrating wall of the transport. My body felt heavy, my augmented limbs dull with fatigue. Somehow we'd made it. Again. As we bumped along the rough terrain back to base, my mind reeled. Was I fast enough? Could I have done more? Was my gear set up the best way? The questions looped, but the truth was unavoidable. I hadn't fired a single shot all night. Not one. I chuckled, the absurdity hitting me all at once. What's funny? The PFC asked, his voice hoarse. I didn't even shoot back, I admitted, running a shaky hand along my rifle. It felt strange, almost foreign, after everything. He grunted, smirking slightly. You're a doc, not a killer, Astra. Doesn't seem like a big deal to me. His words hung in the stale air, reverberating in my mind. A doctor, not a killer. If only that were true. As the evac vehicle rumbled toward the base, the faint hum of my neural augmentations betrayed my unease. The night's events replayed in jagged flashes, gunfire, explosions, and blood. The private beside me drifted into an exhausted, uneasy sleep, his breathing shallow but steady. Around me, the wounded shifted and groaned, their cybernetic enhancements flickering with low-energy alerts. But something gnawed at me, a feeling that it wasn't over. The night had a way of hiding things, even from the best sensors. When we reached the forward operating base, the medics swarmed in like an efficient hive. The injured were carried off, their vitals stabilized by automated drones buzzing around like fireflies. I stayed behind in the shadows, leaning against the cool steel of the vehicle as the adrenaline started to drain away. Tanner's words echoed in my mind. It's over. It didn't feel over. An hour later, I sat in the med bay, watching as the base's AI logged the wounded into the system. The glow of holodisplays danced on my face, but my thoughts were far away. My body screamed for rest, but my mind refused. I was halfway through removing my blood-stained gloves when the emergency alarm shattered the fragile silence. Base perimeter compromised. Hostile forces detected. Immediate action required. My heart sank. They followed us. The base erupted into chaos. Soldiers scrambled to their positions, rifles buzzing to life, while the defensive turrets clicked into action. The medbay became a flurry of movement as those who could stand armed themselves, while drones rushed to fortify the walls with temporary shields. I grabbed my rifle, unused until now, and stepped out into the neon-lit courtyard. Tanner's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and commanding. Astra, report to Sector 3. They're targeting the evac point. The evac point. Of course. The enemy wasn't just after us, they were after the wounded. Rage simmered beneath my skin as I sprinted towards Sector 3, my boots pounding against the steel-plated ground. My HUD lit up with target markers as incoming hostiles breached the outer defenses. They were more organized this time, their movements coordinated and precise. I reached Sector 3 just as the first wave hit. Plasma rounds streaked through the air, illuminating the darkness in bursts of electric blue. The evac mech stood firm, its turrets mowing down attackers with relentless precision, but it wouldn't hold forever. Soldiers darted between cover, shouting orders, while drones zipped overhead, relaying real-time data to our helmets. Doc, over here. Arizona called out, his voice strained. He was pinned down near a stack of supply crates, his rifle's energy pack blinking red. I slid in beside him, my rifle finally coming alive in my hands. Thought you'd never shoot, Doc, he said with a grim smile. Guess there's a first time for everything, I replied, my tone colder than I intended. I leaned out and fired, the recoil vibrating through my arms. The enemy fell back, but only briefly. Watch your six, Arizona shouted. I turned just in time to see an attacker charging at me with a blade shimmering in the dark. My neural augmentations kicked in, time slowing to a crawl. I ducked, pivoting, and brought my rifle up in a sweeping arc, slamming the butt into the attacker's head. He crumpled to the ground, his blade clattering beside him. The battle raged on for what felt like an eternity. The base's defenses held, but only barely. By the time the last hostile was neutralized, the courtyard was littered with debris and scorch marks. Soldiers leaned against walls, catching their breath, while the medics rushed to treat the new wave of injuries. I stood in the middle of it all, my rifle still gripped tightly in my hands. Around me, the battlefield buzzed with the faint hum of energy shields and the static crackle of comms. The enemy was gone, but the damage they left behind was painfully clear. Tanner approached, her visor cracked, her face smudged with dirt and blood. "Nice of you to join the fight," she said, her tone half-joking. "Couldn't let you have all the fun," I replied, though my voice lacked its usual edge. The truth was, I wasn't sure how I felt about what had just happened. "Get some rest," Tanner said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "You've earned it." But as I walked away, the weight of the rifle in my hands felt heavier than ever. The words from earlier echoed in my mind. "You're a doctor, not a killer." Tonight, I had been both. The evac vehicle hummed as it rolled over uneven terrain, its vibration a dull ache against my cyber-augmented limbs. The wounded around me stirred restlessly, their ragged breaths competing with the low whine of the transport's energy core. My HUD flickered with their vitals, stable for now but precariously close to the edge. I stared at the PFC beside me. He'd drifted into an uneasy sleep, his body slumped and his collar wound still oozing faintly through the med-gel patch. The words he'd mumbled earlier echoed in my head. I thought I was dead. I wished I could feel the relief he must have felt. Instead, I was stuck replaying the events of the night in jagged fragments, shouts, blood, the metallic tang of fear that even a respirator couldn't filter out. When the evac arrived at base, the transition was immediate. Med drones swarmed like neon fireflies, hoisting the wounded on hover stretchers and ferrying them into the med bay. The air was a chaotic mix of shouted orders and the sterile hum of automated systems snapping into action. I stepped aside, letting the drones take over, and leaned against the transport's cool metal frame. Exhaustion threatened to pull me under, but unease rooted me in place. The base was alive with activity, though the tension was palpable. The kind of tension that made your hair stand on end, even if you didn't know why. As I walked toward the med bay, Tanner intercepted me, her visor cracked and her stance as unshakable as ever. "Report," she barked. "Wounded stable for now," I replied. "But this doesn't feel right, LT." She nodded, her expression dark. "Agreed. Keep your kit ready." "If they followed us here," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I didn't make it to my bunk. Barely an hour later, the emergency klaxon blared, and my HUD lit up with a base-wide alert. Perimeter breached. Hostiles detected. I sprinted toward the courtyard, rifle in hand, my neural interface automatically syncing with the base's defensive systems. As I turned the corner, the first wave of attackers surged through the outer walls, their movements eerily coordinated. Plasma bolts streaked through the night, casting the scene in a chaotic blue glow. Tanner's voice crackled in my earpiece. "Astra, Sector 3. They're targeting evac." The evac point. Of course. The bastards were after the injured. My pulse quickened as I sprinted towards Sector 3, dodging stray fire and weaving through the chaos. Soldiers shouted commands, their voices cutting through the noise like sharp edges. Drones zipped overhead, relaying battlefield data to our HUDs. The evac mech, a towering, multi-limbed behemoth armed with auto turrets, held its ground near the wounded, laying down suppressive fire as the enemy pushed forward. I slid into cover next to Arizona, who was pinned down behind a stack of supply crates. His visor flickered, a warning light blinking red on his rifle's energy pack. "Thought you'd never join the party," he quipped, even as he struggled to return fire. "Better late than never," I shot back, leveling my rifle and firing into the fray. The recoil felt foreign, a stark reminder of how much time I spent healing instead of fighting. My neural augmentations kicked in, automatically calculating trajectories and syncing my shots with the mech's suppressive fire. The enemy fell back slightly, but it was clear they weren't retreating, they were regrouping. "Behind you," Arizona shouted. I spun just in time to see an attacker lunging at me, their blades shimmering with a plasma edge. My neural enhancements activated, slowing time to a crawl as I sidestepped the strike. In one fluid motion, I brought my rifle around and slammed its butt into the attacker's head. They crumpled to the ground, their weapon clattering uselessly beside them. "Thanks," I muttered, adrenaline spiking through my system. Arizona grinned, reloading his rifle. "Don't mention it." The fighting intensified. The enemy was relentless, each wave more coordinated than the last. The evac mech took a direct hit to one of its turrets, sparks flying as it struggled to compensate. I dashed toward the wounded, who were huddled behind makeshift barriers. One of them, a soldier with a leg wound, was slipping into shock, his cybernetic limb twitching uncontrollably. "Hold on," I shouted, sliding to his side. My medkit sprang to life, a swarm of microdrones stabilizing his vitals as I applied a stim shot to his neck. "You'll make it," I said, more to myself than to him. "Vane," Tanner's voice cut through the chaos. She was nearby, firing with practiced precision. "They're breaching the north gate. We need to hold them off until reinforcements arrive." I nodded, rising to my feet and firing another volley. The enemy pushed closer, their figures silhouetted against the burning wreckage of the outer defenses. I could feel the fatigue creeping in, but there was no time to stop. No time to think. Just survive. The reinforcements arrived just as the base's defenses were on the brink of collapse. The sound of heavy-duty drop pods landing was almost deafening, but it brought with it a wave of relief. Armored soldiers disembarked, their presence turning the tide. The enemy began to retreat, their once coordinated assault devolving into disarray. I slumped against a wall, my rifle slipping from my hands. Around me, the battlefield was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the base's systems coming back online. Tanner approached, her armor battered, but her expression resolute. "You good, Doc?" she asked. Still standing, I replied, though my legs felt like they could give out any second. She clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Get some rest. You've earned it." But as I walked away, exhaustion pulling at every part of me, I couldn't shake the words that had stuck with me all night. "You're a doctor, not a killer." Tonight, I'd been both. The base was silent after the assault, but the kind of silence that doesn't settle. It looms, heavy and tense, like the eye of a storm. My legs dragged me to the medbay as though on autopilot. The aftermath of battle was the same as always, cries of pain, the sterile hum of medical drones, and the clatter of used instruments tossed into bins. I should have felt relief. The wounded were stable. Reinforcements had driven off the attackers. But instead, my gut twisted. Something was off. My neural implants pinged faintly, like a subconscious whisper warning me that this wasn't over. Tanner found me staring at the base's defense monitor, a jumble of blurred movements and infrared scans. "Vane, you're supposed to be resting," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I can't." "Something feels wrong," I replied, my eyes fixed on the screen. The sensors showed nothing unusual, but I'd been on too many ops to ignore my instincts. "Go clear your head," Tanner said, clapping my shoulder. "Take an hour. That's an order." I didn't rest. Instead, I wandered the base, my steps echoing in the empty corridors. Something gnawed at me, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Then my HUD blinked, barely noticeable, but enough. A single flicker in the motion sensors near the western perimeter. It could have been a glitch, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't. I reached the perimeter wall, my rifle slung across my back. The night was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of the base's defenses. The wall's interface glowed faintly as I keyed into the surveillance system, scanning for anything unusual. The western desert stretched endlessly into the dark, but a faint distortion caught my eye, barely there, like a shadow where there shouldn't be one. Control, this is Vane. I'm getting a visual anomaly on the western perimeter. Can you confirm? My voice crackled through the comms. Negative, Vane. Scanners show all clear, came the reply. I frowned. Run a deeper scan. Roger that. Stand by. Seconds dragged into minutes, but before Control could respond, my neural implant flared with a warning. Movement detected. I spun, my rifle already in my hands. A figure darted through the shadows, barely a blur against the sand. Then another. And another. Contact. I barked into my comms, my voice sharp enough to cut steel. Multiple hostiles breaching western perimeter. The base erupted into chaos once again. Sirens wailed, and soldiers poured out from the barracks, weapons primed and ready. The western defenses lit up with tracer fire, illuminating the night like a violent light show. I took cover behind a barricade, my HUD flooding with alerts as enemy signatures swarmed the perimeter. The attackers were different this time. Smarter. Faster. They used cloaking tech to slip past our scanners, their movements coordinated like a synchronized algorithm. I fired into the fray, each shot calculated by my neural augmentations. Around me, the base shuddered under the assault. They're heading for the central hub. Tanner's voice cut through the chaos. My heart sank. The central hub housed the command center, power systems, and, most importantly, the evac data. If they accessed that, they could track every move we made. Vane, fall back and secure the hub. Tanner ordered. On it. I shouted, already moving. I sprinted through the base, the sound of gunfire and explosions fading into the background. My focus narrowed, every ounce of my energy directed toward reaching the hub before the attackers did. I arrived to find the hub under siege. A handful of soldiers held the line, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. One of the attackers, a hulking figure clad in sleek, black armor, kicked down the door to the hub, his plasma rifle glowing menacingly. Not today, I muttered under my breath, raising my rifle. I fired a shot that connected with the attacker's shoulder, sending him staggering back. But his armor absorbed most of the impact, and he turned toward me with a growl. The next few moments were a blur of movement and instinct. The attacker charged, his steps thundering against the ground. My neural augmentations kicked in, time slowing as I ducked under his swing and fired point-blank into his exposed neck. He collapsed with a gurgle, his weapon clattering uselessly to the floor. I didn't have time to celebrate. More attackers flooded the area, their footsteps a crescendo of doom. I tapped into the base's security grid, overriding the lock on the hub's doors. Fall back inside. I yelled to the soldiers. They retreated, and I slammed the doors shut, sealing us in. The attackers pounded against the reinforced barrier, but it wouldn't hold forever. Vane status? Tanner's voice crackled over the comms. Central hub secure for now, but we're pinned down. We need reinforcements. Hold your position. Backup is en route. Inside the hub, the tension was palpable. The soldiers looked to me for guidance, their faces pale and sweat-soaked. I could hear the attackers outside, their muffled voices barking orders as they tried to breach the door. We're not dying here, I said firmly, more to myself than to anyone else. Stay sharp. They'll be through that door any second. As if on cue, the door exploded inward, the force knocking us to the ground. The attackers swarmed in, their movements fluid and deadly. My rifle was already up, and I fired into the nearest target, my neural implants guiding each shot. Around me, the soldiers fought with a desperation born of survival. The battle was brutal. The hub became a war zone, the air thick with smoke and the acrid smell of plasma burns. I moved through the chaos like a shadow, my medkit springing to life whenever a soldier fell. There was no time to think, only react. Finally, the reinforcements arrived. A squad of heavily armored soldiers burst into the hub, their presence turning the tide. The attackers were forced back, their retreat hasty and uncoordinated. The hub was safe for now. After the dust settled, I slumped against a wall, my rifle slipping from my hands. My body ached, and my mind buzzed with exhaustion. Tanner approached, her armor battered, but her expression unwavering. "You held the line," she said simply, her tone heavy with meaning. "Barely," I replied, my voice hoarse. "Barely is enough," she said, offering me a hand. I took it, pulling myself to my feet. But as I looked around at the aftermath, the blood, the broken bodies, the smoke, I couldn't shake the weight pressing down on me. The war wasn't over, and neither was my role in it.